At the precise moment when the morning sun kissed the red earth of Umunna village, when the roosters forgot to crow and even the wind held its breath, Adaeze stood before her reflection in the sacred river and whispered the words that would change everything. "I am more beautiful than the river goddess herself." The water shimmered, then went perfectly still. Not a single ripple disturbed its surface, as if the earth itself had gasped. But Adaeze, admiring her flawless reflection, noticed nothing beyond her own radiant image staring back at her. She had no idea that her words had just awakened something ancient, something that had been waiting 17 years for this exact moment of perfect pride. In the flourishing village of Umunna, where the yam farms stretched like green carpets toward the distant hills, and the air always carried the sweet scent of palm wine and roasted plantain, everyone knew three things to be absolutely true. The rains came when the ancestors willed it. The market day brought prosperity to all. And Adaeze Okafor was the most beautiful girl in 7 villages. "Look at her," whispered the women as they pounded cassava in the morning light. Skin like polished bronze, teeth white as fresh palm nuts, hair that flows like silk threads. Agreed Mama Ngozi, adjusting her wrapper. The girl's beauty burns bright like the heart of the sun itself. But beauty, as the elders often said when they thought no one was listening, could be a blessing or a curse, depending on the heart that carried it. Adaeze walked through the village center with the grace of a young antelope, her colorful Ankara wrapper swaying with each step. Her mother had sewn tiny cowrie shells into the fabric, and they made soft clicking sounds that announced her presence like gentle rainfall on leaves. Every eye followed her movement, and she knew it, felt it, drank it in like honey water on a thirsty day. "Good morning, beautiful Adaeze," called out Chidi, the blacksmith's son, his voice cracking slightly as he tried to catch her attention. Adaeze barely glanced in his direction. Her eyes swept over him like he was a stone in her path, something to step around, not something worth noticing. She hummed, a sound that wasn't quite a greeting, but wasn't quite an insult either. Chidi's face fell like a fruit dropping from a tree. His hands, already calloused from working his father's forge, clenched at his sides. But Adaeze had already moved on. Her attention focused on more important things, like the way the morning light caught the gold threads in her head wrap. "That girl," muttered old Papa Emeka from his usual spot under the kola nut tree. "That girl walks like she owns the very ground beneath her feet." His friend, Papa Obinna, nodded slowly. "Pride, eh? Pride grows in the heart like weeds in an untended farm. If you don't uproot it, it chokes out everything good," Papa Emeka finished. But if Adaeze heard their words, she gave no sign. She was too busy enjoying the way children stopped their games to stare at her, the way young men stumbled over their own feet when she passed, the way even the older women paused in their gossiping to admire her beauty. At the village well, where the water ran crystal clear and cold, Adaeze approached with her large clay pot balanced perfectly on her head. The other girls, Kioma with her kind smile, Ifeoma with her gentle laugh, Amara with her helping hands, were already there, drawing water and sharing the morning news. "Adaeze," called Kioma, waving excitedly. "Come, come. Ifeoma was just telling us about the traveling merchant who arrived last night. He has the most beautiful fabrics from the coast." The girls clustered around Adaeze, like flowers turning toward the sun. But Adaeze looked at them with eyes that saw only their flaws. Kioma's slightly crooked teeth, Ifeoma's too wide nose, Amara's rough hands from helping her mother with the farming. Fabrics? Adaeze's voice carried a note of boredom. "What fabric could possibly make any of you look?" She paused, letting her gaze sweep over them slowly. "Well, it would take more than fabric, wouldn't it?" The silence that followed was sharp as a knife blade. Kioma's smile faded like smoke in the wind. Ifeoma looked down at her feet. Amara's cheeks burned with shame and hurt. I just thought," Kioma stammered. "You thought what?" Adaeze's voice was sweet as palm wine, but with thorns underneath. that some cloth from a dusty merchant could make you beautiful like me? Oh, my dear friends. She laughed, a sound like silver bells, but cold. Some things cannot be bought or borrowed or learned. Some things are simply gifts from the gods. She filled her water pot with elegant, practiced movements, never spilling a single drop. Beauty like mine, Adaeze continued, lifting the heavy pot to her head with graceful ease, is rare, special. It makes me different from others. Her eyes swept over her former friends one more time. Surely you understand. As she walked away, her head held high and her steps sure, she left behind a group of girls whose hearts felt heavy as stones. They had once thought of Adaeze as their friend, their sister, their companion in the journey from girlhood to womanhood. Now they saw her clearly for the first time. Beautiful, yes, but beautiful in the way lightning is beautiful. Brilliant, untouchable, and capable of burning everything it touches. What Adaeze didn't see, as she walked back toward her family compound, was the way the other girls' eyes followed her with something that wasn't admiration anymore. It was pity. And what she didn't know was that in the village of Umunna, the gods had been listening. They always were. What will the gods do in the face of Adaeze's pride? We're about to find out. But while we wait, if you're feeling drawn into this story, take a second to subscribe to Queen of Afritales and like this video. That simple act helps these rich cultural tales continue to spread far and wide. Now, let's return to Adaeze and the curse of the river goddess. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Adaeze made her way to the sacred river that bordered their village. This was her secret ritual, her private time to admire the gift the gods had given her. The river ran clear and still here, creating a perfect mirror for anyone brave enough to look into its depths. The villagers called this stretch of water Omimi, the mirror of truth. Legend said that the river goddess dwelt here, watching and judging the hearts of those who came to gaze upon their reflections. But legends were for old people and children, Adaeze thought. She came here simply because nowhere else provided such a perfect view of her perfection. She knelt at the water's edge, her wrapper spreading around her like flower petals. The river's surface was so still, it might have been polished bronze, and in it, her face appeared like a vision of divine beauty. High cheekbones that could cut glass, eyes bright as stars, lips full and perfect as carved rose petals. "How can anyone compare to this?" she whispered to her reflection. "How can any of those plain village girls even dare to stand beside me?" The water rippled slightly, as if responding to her words. In the distance, a nightbird called, a long, mournful sound that seemed to carry a warning. But Adaeze heard nothing except the song of her own beauty. "Even the goddess who lives in this river," she continued, her voice growing bolder, more confident, "even she cannot match what I see before me. I am more beautiful than any spirit, any goddess, any divine being ever created." The words hung in the air like incense, heavy and dangerous. For a moment, the entire world seemed to pause. The insects stopped chirping. The wind stopped whispering through the trees. Even the water stopped its gentle flowing. Then, slowly, impossibly, her reflection began to change. At first, Adaeze thought it was just the evening light playing tricks, but as she watched, frozen in place, her beautiful reflection started to fade. The lustrous skin grew dull as old brass. The bright eyes became cloudy as muddy water. The perfect lips cracked like dried earth in drought season. "What?" she gasped, touching her real face with trembling fingers. Her skin still felt smooth and warm, but in the water the reflection continued its terrible transformation. A voice rose from the depths of the river, ancient and powerful as the earth itself. "You wish to be more beautiful than a goddess? Then let us see how beautiful pride truly is." The water began to glow with an inner light, and from its depths emerged a figure that made Adaeze's heart stop, like a caught bird. The river goddess Adaeze rose from the water, her skin the color of deep river stones, her hair flowing like liquid starlight. her presence commanding as thunder in the sky. "Child of Umunna," the goddess spoke, her voice carrying the wisdom of 1,000 years. "You have gazed into my sacred mirror and found only yourself worthy of admiration. You have looked upon your sisters and seen only their flaws. You have taken the gift of beauty I gave you and turned it into a weapon against those who love you." Adaeze tried to speak, tried to apologize, tried to take back her careless words, but her voice caught in her throat like a fishbone, and only small, frightened sounds emerged. "You claim to be more beautiful than a goddess," Adaeze continued, her eyes reflecting depths that seemed to hold the history of the world. "Very well. For one full season, from this new moon to the next, you shall see yourself as others truly see you. When you look in any mirror, any still water, any reflecting surface, you will not see the beauty you prize so highly. Instead, you will see the reflection of your heart." The goddess raised her hand, and power flowed from her fingertips like visible wind. "Only when you learn to see true beauty, the beauty that comes from kindness, from humility, from love for others, only then will your reflection return to normal. Until that day, every mirror will show you the face of your pride." "Please," Adaeze finally found her voice. "Please, I didn't mean—" "Did you not?" The goddess's voice was not angry, but it was final as the setting sun. "Search your heart, child, and tell me truly, did you not mean every word?" Adaeze opened her mouth to deny it, to claim it was all a mistake, a moment of foolishness. But under the goddess's knowing gaze, she found she could not lie. The words had come from her heart, from a deep well of pride and arrogance she had nurtured like a poisonous garden. "Learn well, daughter of Umunna," Adaeze said, her form already beginning to fade back into the water. "Beauty is not what you possess, but what you give to the world. Pride is not what makes you special, but what makes you small. When you understand this truly, call my name, and I will return your reflection to you." With that, the goddess disappeared, leaving only ripples on the water's surface and the echo of wisdom in the evening air. Adaeze knelt alone by the riverbank. Her whole world changed in the space of a few heartbeats. When she finally gathered the courage to look down at the water again, the face that stared back at her was a stranger's. Hollow-eyed, mean-spirited, ugly with the weight of selfishness and pride. It was her, but it was also the truth of what she had become inside. That night, Adaeze returned to her family's compound, with tears streaming down her face. Though to anyone watching, she looked exactly the same as always. The curse was hers alone to see, her private mirror of truth. But curses, as every wise person knows, are often just blessings wearing disguises. And sometimes the greatest gift the gods can give us is the chance to see ourselves clearly, even when, especially when, we do not like what we see. The next morning arrived like any other, with roosters crowing and the sun painting the sky in gentle pastels. But for Adaeze, everything had changed. She sat in her small sleeping hut, staring at the polished bronze mirror her mother had given her for her 16th birthday. The face looking back at her was a nightmare. Skin like cracked mud, eyes dull as old stones, lips thin and cruel as a knife's edge. "Adaeze," her mother's voice called from the main compound. "Come, my daughter, your breakfast grows cold." With trembling hands, Adaeze covered the mirror with a cloth and stepped outside. The familiar world of her family's compound felt strange now, like a place she was seeing for the first time. Her mother, Mama Okafor, was grinding pepper on a large stone, her movements rhythmic and practiced. Her father sat under their small palm tree, carving a new handle for his farming hoe. "Ne'em, my daughter," her mother said without looking up. "You look troubled this morning. Did you not sleep well?" "I'm fine, Mama," Adaeze managed, though her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. Her father glanced up from his carving. "Your face says different, Ada M. What weighs on your heart?" For a moment, Adaeze wanted to tell them everything. About the river, the goddess, the terrible reflection that now lived in every mirror. But how could she explain that their beautiful daughter had been cursed for the very pride they had always celebrated? "Just strange dreams," she said finally. Papa Okafor nodded wisely. "Dreams are messages from the ancestors. Pay attention to them, but do not let them steal your joy." If only he knew, Adaeze thought, that some dreams were actually curses, and some messages were actually punishments for having too much joy in the wrong things. After breakfast, she walked to the village center, as she always did. But everything felt different. The usual chorus of admiration and attention was still there. People still turned to look at her, still whispered about her beauty, still treated her like something precious and special. But now she knew it was all based on something that was no longer real, at least not for her. At the market, Mama Adaeze, who sold the finest palm oil in 3 villages, called out to her as always, "Adaeze, my beautiful daughter, come see what wonderful things I have today." Adaeze approached the woman's stall, but her steps felt heavy. She caught sight of herself in a large pot of oil, and the reflection that stared back was the same horrible face from that morning. The face of her pride and cruelty made visible. "Are you feeling well, my child?" Mama Adaeze asked, studying Adaze's expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I'm fine," Adaeze said quickly, turning away from the oil pot. But as she moved through the market, every shiny surface, metal pots, bowls of water, even the polished gourds, showed her the same terrible truth. At the fabric merchant's stall, she found Kioma, Ifeoma, and Amara examining beautiful cloth. Her former friends looked up when she approached, but their smiles were cautious now, guarded. The warmth that had once been automatic was gone, replaced by polite distance. "Hello, Adaeze," Kioma said quietly. "The merchant has some lovely things," Ifeoma added, but her voice lacked enthusiasm. Adaeze wanted to join them, to laugh and gossip, and share in their excitement like they used to do. But the memory of her cruel words from the day before hung between them like a wall of thorns. She had built this distance herself, word by word, comment by comment, dismissal by dismissal. "Yes," she said awkwardly. "Very nice." She picked up a piece of cloth, deep blue with golden threads that caught the light like captured sunlight. In its shiny surface, she caught another glimpse of her cursed reflection and nearly dropped the fabric. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said the merchant. A tall man with kind eyes and weathered hands. Blue like the depths of the ocean, gold like the heart of the sun. This cloth has traveled far to find its proper owner. "How much?" Adaeze asked, though she wasn't really interested in buying anything. She just needed something to do with her hands, something to distract from the growing realization that her entire world was built on something as fragile as her reflection in still water. "For you, beautiful daughter, a fair price, but—" The merchant paused, studying her face with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Beauty that comes only from the surface is like this cloth without a skilled weaver. It has potential, but it needs something more to become truly magnificent." Adaeze stared at him, wondering if somehow he could see what she saw, if the curse was more visible than she thought. But his expression remained kind, not horrified, so she knew the ugliness was still hers alone to bear. She bought the cloth anyway, partly because she needed to do something normal, and partly because the merchant's words echoed in her mind with uncomfortable truth. As the days passed, Adaze's world began to feel smaller and smaller. She stopped visiting the river where the curse began. She avoided mirrors, polished surfaces, anything that might show her the face of her pride. But the hardest part wasn't seeing herself differently. It was beginning to see everything else differently too. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before. The way Kioma always helped old Papa Emeka carry his water pot, even though he never asked. The way Ifeoma shared her lunch with the children who had less. The way Amara spent her free time teaching the younger girls how to weave, never asking for payment, just sharing her skills with generous hands. She watched these acts of kindness and felt something strange growing in her chest. Not the warm glow of admiration she was used to receiving, but a different kind of warmth. the warmth of wanting to be part of something larger than herself. But every time she thought about joining in, about reaching out, the memory of her cruel words held her back. How could she approach girls she had insulted? How could she offer help to people she had looked down upon? How could she be part of a community she had set herself above? One afternoon, as she sat alone under a tree watching the village children play a game with stones and laughter, little Kelechi approached her. Kelechi was maybe 7 years old, with bright eyes and the kind of fearless curiosity that only children possess. "Sister Adaeze," the little girl said, settling down beside her without invitation. "Why do you look so sad?" "I'm not sad," Adaeze said automatically, then caught herself. When had she started lying about everything? "Well, maybe a little." "Is it because you don't have any friends anymore?" The question hit like a stone to the chest. "What makes you think I don't have friends?" Kelechi shrugged with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Because you used to laugh with the other big girls, and now you sit by yourself. And when they see you coming, they get quiet and busy, like when Mama's angry, and we pretend to be cleaning." From the mouths of children comes truth, Adaeze thought. Even a 7-year-old could see what she had done to herself. "Kelechi," she said carefully, "what makes someone a good friend?" The little girl considered this seriously. "Well, my best friend Umunna shares her palm nuts with me, even when she only has a few. And when I fell down and scraped my knee, she helped me find Mama instead of laughing. And when the older boys called me names, she told them to stop even though they're bigger than her." Sharing, helping, protecting. Such simple things, Adaeze thought. When had she last done any of them? "And," Kelechi continued, warming to her subject, "good friends don't make you feel small. They make you feel bigger, like you can do more things than you thought." That evening, Adaeze sat in her family compound, thinking about Kelechi's words. Her parents had gone to visit neighbors, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the painful awareness of how much she had changed in just a few days. Or maybe she hadn't changed at all. Maybe she was just finally seeing herself clearly. She thought about the girls she had called friends, about how she had made them feel smaller instead of bigger. She thought about all the young men who had tried to gain her favor, and how she had treated their attention as something she deserved, rather than something to be grateful for. She thought about the community that had celebrated her beauty, and how she had used that celebration to separate herself from them, rather than to serve them. The curse was supposed to teach her something, she realized. But what exactly was she supposed to learn? And more importantly, how was she supposed to learn it when she had built such high walls around herself that no one could reach her, and she couldn't reach anyone else? That night, sleep came hard and was filled with dreams of reflections that changed and shifted, showing her faces she didn't recognize, some beautiful, some ugly, some simply human in ways she had forgotten how to be. When she woke in the morning, she made a decision. She couldn't change what she had done, but maybe she could start doing different things. Maybe the path back to her true reflection lay not in mirrors, but in the eyes of others. Not in how they saw her, but in how she chose to see them. It was time to stop hiding from her curse and start learning from it. Adaeze's opportunity to begin learning came sooner than expected, carried on the wings of crisis as lessons often are. 3 days after her conversation with little Kelechi, the rains failed to come. This was the season when the skies should have opened up and blessed the earth with life-giving water. But instead, the sun blazed mercilessly day after day, and the clouds that gathered each afternoon drifted away without releasing their burden. "It's not natural," muttered Papa Obinna, wiping sweat from his forehead as he examined his wilting yam plants. "The seasons have never been this confused before." "Something has upset the balance," agreed Mama Ngozi, looking up at the cloudless sky with worried eyes. "The spirits are angry about something." In the village center, the elders gathered under the great Iroko tree to discuss what could be done. The sacred well that had never run dry in living memory was now showing its rocky bottom. The crops that should have been thriving were beginning to wither. The youngest children cried from thirst, and the oldest people spoke in hushed tones about similar droughts in their grandparents' time. Adaeze watched the emergency council meeting from a distance, her heart heavy with a terrible suspicion. The drought had begun just days after her encounter with the river goddess. Could her pride, her curse, somehow be affecting the entire village? Chief Okonkwo, a man whose wisdom was matched only by his kindness, stood to address the gathered villagers. "We must work together now," he said, his voice carrying the authority of many years of leadership. "The river still flows, though it runs lower each day. We must organize ourselves to carry water to those who cannot make the journey. We must share what food we have. We must support each other until the rains return." "But who will carry water for the old people?" asked Mama Izina. "The path to the river is long and difficult. And who will watch the small children while their parents work longer hours to keep the crops alive?" added Papa Emeka. Adaeze felt something stirring in her chest, not the familiar warmth of being admired, but something different, something that felt like purpose. Before she could lose her courage, she stepped forward. "I can help." The conversation stopped. Every eye turned to her, and for a moment, the silence was so complete, she could hear her own heartbeat. She had spoken without thinking, driven by an impulse she didn't fully understand. "Adaeze," Chief Okonkwo said gently, "that is generous of you to offer, but carrying water is hard work, and the path can be dangerous when the river runs low." She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but not from anger, from shame. Of course they would doubt her willingness to do hard work. When had she ever done anything difficult or dangerous for others? "I know I haven't. I know I'm not known for helping with difficult things," she said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "But I want to learn. I want to be useful." There was something in her voice, some note of genuine humility that hadn't been there before. Chief Okonkwo studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Tomorrow at dawn you can join the water-carrying group. But understand, this is not work for someone seeking praise or attention. This is work that must be done quietly, consistently, without reward, except the knowledge that our community survives." "I understand," Adaeze said, though she wasn't entirely sure she did. That night, she lay awake thinking about what she had committed herself to. She had never carried water for anyone except herself. She had never done any work that didn't somehow serve her own interests. But something about the drought, about the fear in people's eyes, about the way the community was pulling together while she stood apart, it made her want to be part of something larger than her own reflection. The next morning, she arrived at the river before dawn, as instructed. The water-carrying group was already there, mostly older women and young mothers, people who understood that survival was more important than comfort. They looked surprised to see her, but not unwelcoming. "Adaeze," said Mama Chidinma, a woman whose strong arms had been carrying water for 40 years. "You came." "I said I would. Many people say many things. Few people do them." Mama Chidinma handed her a large clay pot. "This work will hurt your back, crack your hands, make your feet sore. Are you sure?" Adaeze looked down at the pot, then at the women around her. For the first time in days, she deliberately sought out a reflection, this time in the river's dark surface. The face that looked back was still the cursed one, still hollow-eyed and cruel-looking. But somehow, standing here with the water carriers, it didn't seem as important as it had before. "I'm sure," she said. The work was harder than anything she had ever done. The clay pot, when filled, was so heavy it made her neck ache and her shoulders burn. The path from the river to the village was rocky and uneven, and she stumbled several times, sloshing precious water onto the ground. Her soft hands, unused to such labor, developed blisters within the first hour. But something unexpected happened as she struggled along the path. Mama Chidinma, seeing her difficulty, began to sing, a work song that matched the rhythm of walking, that made the burdens seem lighter somehow. The other women joined in, their voices weaving together like cloth on a loom. "Water flows down the mountain, feeds the valley, feeds the tree. Strong hands carry, strong hearts giving. What we pour out returns to we." Adaeze didn't know the words, but she found herself humming along, her steps falling into rhythm with the song and the other carriers. For the first time since the curse began, she felt connected to something. Not as the beautiful girl everyone admired, but as one worker among many, all serving the same purpose. At old Mama Ukwu's compound, where they delivered the first batch of water, the elderly woman's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Bless you, my daughters," she said, her voice shaky with age and emotion. "Bless you for keeping this old woman alive another day." Adaeze felt something break open in her chest, a warmth that was completely different from the glow of being praised for her beauty. This warmth came from knowing she had done something necessary, something good, something that mattered more than her appearance. By the end of the day, every muscle in her body ached, her beautiful head wrap was dusty and stained with sweat, and her hands were raw from gripping the heavy pot. But when she looked around at the group of women who had accepted her as one of their own, who had shared their songs and their strength with her, she felt something she had never experienced before. She felt useful. She felt needed in a way that had nothing to do with how she looked, and everything to do with what she could give. That evening, as she soaked her sore feet in cool water, her mother sat beside her with a puzzled expression. "Ada M," she said gently, "what has happened to you? This morning you left looking like my proud, beautiful daughter. Tonight you return looking like someone different." "Different how?" Her mother considered carefully. "Like someone who has worked hard for others. Like someone who has discovered something important. Your father and I, we are proud of your beauty, yes. But today we are proud of your heart." Adaeze felt tears prick her eyes. When had anyone ever been proud of her heart? Over the following days, she continued to work with the water carriers. It became easier, her body growing stronger, her hands developing protective calluses. But more than that, she began to understand things she had never noticed before. She learned that Mama Chidinma's husband had died 3 years earlier, leaving her to raise 4 children alone, and that the older women in the water-carrying group helped her by watching the youngest when she worked longer hours. She learned that young Mama Adana was pregnant with her 3rd child, but still carried water for her elderly neighbors because no one else could do it. She learned that the songs they sang were not just for rhythm, but for hope. Ways of reminding each other that hard times pass, that communities survive through mutual care. She began to see how much work happened in the village that she had never paid attention to. Women helping women, families supporting families, the quiet, constant labor that kept everyone alive and safe. She had spent so much time focused on being admired that she had missed the entire web of relationships that actually held the community together. But the real test came on the 7th day of the drought, when little Kelechi didn't come out to play with the other children. "She's sick," her mother told the water carriers when they brought the daily supply to her compound. "Fever and weakness. She asks for water constantly, but nothing seems to help." Adaeze felt her heart clench like a fist. Kelechi, who had asked her about friendship with such innocent wisdom, who had seen through her loneliness with a child's clear sight. "Has the healer seen her?" asked Mama Chidinma. "He says it's the drought sickness. Some children get it when the water is low and the heat is high. He gave me herbs, but..." Kelechi's mother shrugged helplessly. "We can only wait and hope." That night, Adaeze couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Kelechi's bright eyes, about her questions and observations, about the way she had sat beside her without fear or judgment. She thought about all the times she had ignored children, dismissed them as unimportant, failed to see their wisdom. Just before dawn, she made a decision. She slipped out of her family compound and made her way to the sacred river, to the spot where her curse had begun. The water level was lower now, but it still flowed, still reflected the pale pre-dawn sky. And somewhere in its depths, she knew, the goddess still waited. Kneeling at the water's edge, Adaeze spoke to her reflection. Not the beautiful one she had lost, but the cursed one that had taught her so much. "Idemili," she called softly. "River goddess, I know you can hear me. I think I've learned what you wanted me to learn. But there's a little girl who is sick, and I think I think maybe this drought is my fault. If my pride caused this, if my curse brought this suffering to others, please, take it out on me, not on innocent children." The water was still for a long moment. Then, slowly, ripples began to spread across its surface, and the goddess emerged as she had before. But her expression was different now, still ancient and powerful, but somehow gentler. "You think the drought is your punishment?" Adaeze asked. "Isn't it? It started right after you cursed me. And if my pride was great enough to anger a goddess, maybe it was great enough to upset the natural order." The goddess studied her for a long moment. "Child, the drought comes because the earth has its own seasons, its own needs. Your curse affected only you, your sight, your understanding, your heart. But your response to that curse..." She smiled, and it was like sunlight on water. "Your response has been beautiful to watch." Adaeze felt confusion wash over her. "But Kelechi is sick, and the crops are dying, and you have spent 7 days carrying water for those who could not carry it themselves. You have learned the songs that lighten labor. You have discovered that your hands were made for more than admiring, that your strength could serve purposes greater than your vanity." The goddess reached out and touched Adaeze's cheek gently. "Tell me, daughter, when you look at the other water carriers now, what do you see?" Without thinking, Adaeze answered honestly. "I see Mama Chidinma's strength and determination. I see Mama Adana's generosity, even when she's struggling. I see hands that know how to heal, and hearts that know how to hope, and voices that know how to encourage. I see..." She paused, understanding dawning. "I see beauty. Real beauty." "And when you think of little Kelechi, what do you see?" "Wisdom, curiosity, the kind of fearless kindness that makes the world better." Tears began to flow down Adaeze's cheeks. "I see someone I want to protect and learn from, not someone I want to impress." "Then you are ready," said Adaeze, "to see your true reflection again." The goddess gestured toward the water, and Adaeze looked down nervously. But the face that stared back at her was her own again. Not the cursed reflection of her pride, but not exactly the same as before either. Her features were the same, her skin still smooth, her eyes still bright. But something deeper had changed. There was kindness in her expression now, humility in the set of her mouth, wisdom in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was still beautiful, but it was a different kind of beauty. The kind that came from understanding her place in the larger web of life, from knowing that her gifts were meant to serve others, not separate her from them. "Your outer beauty was always real," the goddess said softly, "but now your inner beauty matches it. And that, child, is the most powerful magic of all." As the goddess began to fade back into the water, she added, "The drought will end today, not because of magic, but because the Earth's season of testing is complete. But the lessons you have learned, those will serve you for the rest of your life. Use them well." Adaeze remained by the water as the sun rose, watching her true reflection in the slowly brightening river. She looked the same as she always had, but she felt completely different. The beauty was still there, but now it felt like a responsibility rather than a privilege, a gift to be shared rather than a treasure to be hoarded. When she finally stood to leave, she noticed storm clouds gathering on the horizon for the first time in weeks. By afternoon, the rains would come. But more importantly, she finally understood what Kelechi had meant about good friends making you feel bigger, capable of more than you thought possible. It was time to go home and start the real work of building the friendships she had nearly destroyed, of using her gifts in service of her community, of being the kind of person whose inner reflection could match the outer beauty she had been blessed with. The curse was broken, but the real transformation was just beginning. The rains came that afternoon, as Adaeze had promised, not in the gentle way of normal season rains, but in a glorious downpour that sent children dancing in the streets, and adults raising their faces to the sky with tears of gratitude. But Adaeze barely noticed the rain. She was too busy standing outside Kelechi's family compound. gathering courage for what might be the most important conversation of her life. When Kelechi's mother, Mama Neka, saw her approaching, her expression was cautious but not unwelcoming. "Adaeze, what brings you here? The rains have started. You should be celebrating with the others." "I came to ask about Kelechi. Is she feeling better?" Mama Neka's face softened with the relief of good news. "Yes, praise the ancestors. Her fever broke this morning, just as the first clouds appeared. She's weak still, but she's asking for palm nuts and complaining about staying in bed, so I know she's truly recovering." Could I see her? Just for a moment?" Something in Adaeze's voice, a quality of genuine concern that had never been there before, made Mama Neka step aside. "Of course. She's been asking about you actually. She said she had important questions to ask you." Kelechi was sitting up in her sleeping mat, looking pale but alert. When she saw Adaeze, her face broke into the kind of pure, joyful smile that only children can manage. "Sister Adaeze, you came. Mama said you were working with the water carriers every day. Did you learn how to carry the big pots without spilling?" "I'm still learning," Adaeze said, settling down beside the little girl. "But yes, I'm getting better. How are you feeling?" "Much better. But I was thinking while I was sick." Kelechi's expression grew serious in that way children have when they're wrestling with big ideas. "I was thinking about what makes someone beautiful. And I think maybe it's not just how they look." Adaeze felt her heart skip. "What do you mean?" "Well, when I was really sick, Mama Chidinma came to sing for me, even though she was tired from carrying water all day. And Mama Adana brought special honey, even though her family doesn't have much. And the other big girls, Kioma and Ifeoma and Amara, they took turns telling me stories to keep me from being scared." Kelechi paused, studying Adaeze's face with the intense attention children give to things they find puzzling. "You're still the most beautiful girl in the village," she continued. "Everyone says so. But those other people, when they helped me, they looked beautiful too. Different from you, but beautiful in a way that made me feel better inside. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Adaeze whispered, remembering her conversation with the goddess, remembering the moment she had begun to see real beauty in the water carriers' faces. "So I was wondering," Kelechi said, "what kind of beautiful do you want to be?" It was such a simple question, asked with such innocent directness, that it took Adaeze's breath away. What kind of beautiful did she want to be? "I want to be the kind of beautiful that helps people feel better," she said finally. "The kind that makes things better, instead of just being admired." Kelechi clapped her hands together with delight. "That's exactly what I hoped you would say. Because I was thinking, when I'm all better, maybe you could teach me how to carry water properly. And maybe I could teach you the hand-clapping game that Kioma taught me. And we could practice being the helpful kind of beautiful together." For the second time that day, Adaeze felt tears on her cheeks. But these were different tears. Not tears of shame or regret, but tears of gratitude for this child's generous heart, for this chance to start over, for this opportunity to become someone worthy of the reflection she had finally reclaimed. "I would love that," she said. "I would love that more than anything." Over the following weeks, as the village recovered from the drought and the crops began to flourish again, Adaeze discovered what it meant to build real relationships instead of collecting admirers. She sought out Kioma, Ifeoma, and Amara, not to rejoin their group as if nothing had happened, but to offer genuine apologies for her cruelty, and to ask humbly if they might give her another chance to learn how to be a real friend. "I don't expect you to trust me immediately," she told them one afternoon as they sat under the palm trees near the market. "I know I hurt you. I know I made you feel small when I should have made you feel valued. But I want to try to be different. I want to learn what friendship really means." The conversation was awkward at first, full of careful words and cautious emotions. But Kioma, whose nature was as forgiving as sunshine, spoke first. "We all make mistakes," she said quietly. "What matters is whether we learn from them." "The question is," added Ifeoma, "what have you learned?" Adaeze thought carefully before answering. "I learned that beauty is something you give, not something you keep. I learned that making others feel small makes you small. no matter how beautiful you are. I learned that real friendship means seeing the best in people and helping them see it too. Amara, who had been silent through this exchange, finally spoke. Those are good words, Adaeze. But words are easy. Actions are what matter. Then watch my actions, Adaeze said simply. And if they don't match my words, tell me. Help me become the kind of person whose friendship is actually worth having. It wasn't easy, rebuilding relationships she had damaged with her pride. There were moments of awkwardness, times when her old patterns of thinking tried to reassert themselves, occasions when she had to consciously choose humility over arrogance, service over selfishness. But gradually, as she continued working with the water carriers, as she helped Kelechi learn the rhythms of useful work, as she practiced seeing beauty in unexpected places, something wonderful began to happen. The other young women began to relax around her. Conversations became more natural. Laughter returned to their interactions. One evening, as they sat together working on a new weaving project that Amara was teaching them, Ifeoma looked up from her threads and said, Adaeze, you know what's different about you now? What? You listen. Before, when we talked, you always seemed to be waiting for your turn to speak, or thinking about something else entirely, but now you actually listen to what we're saying. Chioma nodded enthusiastically. And you ask questions. Real questions about our lives, our thoughts, our dreams. It makes us feel like you actually care about us as people. And, added Amara with a small smile, you're not constantly checking your reflection in every shiny surface. You're looking at us instead of at yourself. Adaeze laughed, a sound of genuine joy rather than practiced beauty. I think I finally understand that the most important reflections are in other people's eyes. Not the way they see my face, but the way they see my heart. The friendship that grew between the four girls was different from what Adaeze had experienced before. It was built on mutual respect rather than admiration, on shared work rather than shared vanity, on the desire to lift each other up rather than to shine brighter than others. When Chief Okonkwo announced a festival to celebrate the end of the drought, Adaeze found herself more excited about planning it with her friends than about being the center of attention at it. They worked together to organize activities for the children, to coordinate the food sharing, to ensure that the elderly and infirm could participate fully. You know, Chioma said as they decorated the village center with palm fronds and bright flowers, this is the first festival where I'm not worried about how I look compared to everyone else. What do you mean? Asked Ifeoma. I mean, usually I spend festival days feeling self-conscious because Adaeze is so beautiful and I'm just ordinary. But now, she paused, searching for the right words. Now I feel like we're all beautiful in different ways, and that's what makes the celebration complete. Adaeze felt a warm glow spread through her chest. Not the familiar heat of being praised, but something deeper and more satisfying. The knowledge that her presence in the group made others feel better about themselves instead of worse. On the day of the festival, as the entire village gathered to sing and dance and share the abundance that the rains had brought, Adaeze found herself in the center of attention once again. But this time, it felt completely different. Young men still approached her, still complimented her beauty, still sought her favor, but now she responded with graciousness rather than arrogance, with genuine interest in them as people, rather than dismissive acceptance of their admiration as her due. When Chidi, the blacksmith's son, shyly offered her a small iron bracelet he had made, she didn't brush him off as she once might have. Instead, she examined the careful workmanship, asked about the techniques he had used, and praised his skill genuinely. You have gifted hands, she told him. The village is lucky to have such a talented craftsman. Chidi's face lit up like sunrise. You really think so? I've been practicing new techniques, hoping to contribute more to the community. I think anyone who creates beautiful things while also serving their community is doing exactly what the gods intended, Adaeze replied. Later, as the evening dancing began, she found herself swept into the circle, not as a showpiece to be admired, but as a participant in the community celebration. She danced with old Papa Emeka, who told her stories about festivals from his youth. She danced with the water carriers, who had become her dearest mentors. She danced with Kelechi and the other children, who giggled with delight at having a big sister to play with. But the moment that meant the most came when the village praise singer, Old Mama Obioma, called for attention. "Tonight we celebrate not just the return of the rains," she announced in her voice, trained by decades of storytelling, "but the return of balance to our community. We have learned again that beauty is not just something we possess, but something we share. That strength is not just individual, but collective. That the gods bless us not to separate us from each other, but to enable us to serve each other better." Her eyes found Adaeze in the crowd. Some among us have learned these lessons recently, and in learning them, have taught them to us all. Tonight we celebrate not just how we look, but who we choose to be. As the celebration continued into the night, Adaeze found herself standing again by the sacred river, but this time she was not alone. Kioma, Ifeoma, Amara, and even little Kelechi had joined her, drawn by the peaceful sound of water flowing over stones. "Look," whispered Kelechi, pointing to their reflections in the moonlit water. "We all look beautiful tonight." And they did. Not because they were all equally physically beautiful, they were as different as flowers in a garden, but because each face reflected contentment, kindness, the glow of belonging to something larger than themselves. "The most beautiful thing," Adaeze said softly, "is when people can see their own worth reflected in the love of others." As they stood together by the water, she silently thanked the river goddess for the gift of the curse that had taught her to see clearly. Sometimes the greatest blessings came disguised as the hardest lessons. Sometimes losing yourself was the only way to find out who you really were. And sometimes the most beautiful reflection you could find was not in still water, but in the faces of people whose lives you had chosen to make better. Years later, when Adaeze had become a woman of 25, when she had married Chidi the blacksmith, and raised children who learned kindness from their first breaths, when she had become known throughout 7 villages, not just for her beauty, but for her wisdom and generosity, she would sit by the sacred river with her own daughter and tell this story. "Mama," little Chinwe would ask, her eyes wide with curiosity, "were you really cursed by a goddess?" "I was blessed by a goddess," Adaeze would correct gently. "I just didn't understand it at the time." "But you couldn't see your real face?" "No, my precious one. I could only see my real face. That was the blessing." And as they sat together by the water that had taught Adaeze her most important lesson, mother and daughter would look at their reflections. Different faces, different generations, but both showing the same quality of love that made any face beautiful. "What do you see when you look at me, Mama?" Chinwe would ask. "I see possibility," Adaeze would answer. "I see kindness waiting to bloom. I see beauty that will grow more radiant every time you choose to help others rather than yourself. I see a daughter who will never need to learn the hard lessons I learned because she is learning the easy lessons first." "What are the easy lessons?" "That beauty is something you give, not something you keep. That the most beautiful people are those who make others feel beautiful too. That the gods give us gifts, not to separate us from our community, but to help us serve it better." And little Chinwe would nod solemnly, understanding in the way that children do when wisdom is shared with love, rather than forced with punishment. "Will you teach me to carry water for the old people, Mama?" "Yes, my daughter. But first, let me teach you the work songs. They make the burden lighter, and they remind us that no one has to carry their load alone." As their voices rose together in the ancient melodies of cooperation and care, as their reflections danced together on the sacred water's surface, the river goddess would smile in her depths and remember why she had always loved the daughters of Umunna. Some lessons, after all, were worth passing on. And the most beautiful magic of all was watching wisdom flow from one generation to the next, like water finding its natural course toward the sea. In this way, the story lived on, not as a tale of curse and redemption, but as a reminder that true beauty, the kind that lasts beyond youth, beyond physical perfection, beyond the temporary gifts of flesh, comes from choosing every day to see and serve the beauty in others. And in the village of Umunna, where the sacred river still flows and the work songs still lighten heavy loads, this wisdom continues to grow like ripples, spreading across still water, touching every shore it meets with the gentle power of truth. The end. And so the village learned that pride may make one person shine alone, but humility makes the whole community glow with shared light. From that day forward, whenever someone's beauty began to separate them from others rather than connecting them to others, the elders would tell them the story of Adaeze and the mirror of truth, reminding them that the most beautiful reflection one can have is the love and respect that lives in the eyes of those whose lives you've chosen to improve. This is how it came to be that in Umunna, beauty became not something to possess, but something to share, not something to guard, but something to give freely, knowing that, like the sacred river itself, the more generously it flows, the more abundant it becomes.